You know, there's a lot of wizards of code in this room, and a lot of really scary, smart people. But as our community has grown, we need more than wizards of code to look after ourselves. And the issues are growing larger, and different functions and different expertise come into play. I'm really excited this morning that our first speaker is a wizard. He's a wizard with IP and he's a wizard with finance. So please welcome Keith Bergelt.
Hi there. Great to be with you this morning. Hope that this triggers a dialogue. I invite anyone and everyone to email me if you have questions, and I'll try and get back to you with my responses. I think one of the key things is to recognize that the wonderfully elegant and incredibly impactful community that you all represent and are partaking and participating in developing and advancing is an incredibly creative community. I'm here and I've taken a role at running Open Invention Network to ensure that the periphery of that network is not intruded upon, and that you can all continue to do what you do well, and that the wonderfully self-organizing and self-regulating nature of open source has an opportunity to be incredibly pervasive well beyond Linux and the 300 plus programs that exist today, and that becomes the paradigm for how we think and how we invent. With that, I'll talk about current realities. I think we'd like to, in many cases, we'd like to think about a world that could be different. Certainly there's a lot of discussion about patents and should they be affecting software, should there be software patents granted. I think the reality is that we have them. I'll talk a little bit about Open Invention Network in the context of what we're doing in collaboration with others, because this is really not solely our province to help. We're just part of a larger support mechanism that exists, whether it be the Linux Foundation, SFLC, or many others. Talk about a view I have of the future inventiveness and an appropriate path potentially for capturing the inventive capacities around open source that will enable rather than have the potential to be destructive of open source's growth and Linux's growth in particular. And then I'll talk about where we are, my perception of where we are in cycle paradigms, where Linux is evolving, and what that means for the future. One of the realities, as I said, is that open source is the single most important invention and innovation modality to come into being in the post-industrial era. And I think that statement, many times we live in the moments, we're involved in a project, in an activity, developing an application, and we tend not to be able to think from 20,000 or 30,000 feet and have that perspective. But what we're all part of here, and what you've helped in a very significant way to create, is this represents a phase shift for society, for the global economy, and it allows us to engage the entire world in the inventive activities to be able to create value in a way that the inefficient processes that we utilized before of siloed development of technology erodes as we speak, and the greater the community for open source, the more activity we'll have in being able to create a paradigm that will not go away and pave the way for more open source programs. Technology companies, another reality, they've lived with the notion of inventing, and codification of those inventions have occurred in the form of patents, trademarks, and copyrights. We live with that legacy. And I think it's something we have to accept from the past and the present and look to remake the future in a way that's more effective. Patent offices have granted software patents. That's a reality. Patents may either enable or retard the growth of Linux and open source, depending upon the owners of those patents and what their motivations and goals are. Capital right now is chasing spread. That's an expression from financial services, but capital has left mortgage-backed securities and securitization structured finance products, and we've all read about what's happened in the last year. That movement away from those areas has brought it to esoteric assets and to intellectual property. And as a result, we see an increasing number of patent troll business models because it's opportunistic utilization of capital. We've also seen, in reaction to that, defensive patent pools, whether it's Open Invention Network, the Allied Security Trust, and a number of others, the WIMAX Fund. They're all designed to acquire assets to provide for a level playing field and to be able to take patents out of the realm of impacting in a negative way the growth of technology. As I said, we're not alone at Open Invention Network in trying to enable the community through and minimize the effect of patents. The Linux Foundation maintains the Patent Commons, peer-to-patent. They've been incredibly influential in coordinating that activity, which I think has been a great success and is likely to be even a greater success as more and more people actually join the community of identifying prior art so that fewer less relevant patents can be authored. The Software Freedom Law Center, the activities in the GPL, serving as counsel to support particularly small to medium-sized companies, and Open Invention Network, IBM, Sony, Red Hat, Novell, NEC, and Philips got together to recognize that they had a broader responsibility. Rather than being purely self-interested, they needed to put their money out there and to be able to develop a model that would allow them to create a better level playing field for all to compete. And that's really what they've done, and that's why I'm running Open Invention Network and have brought in the talent that I've brought in to be able to ensure that we're able to look out for the community and make sure that it is an open and competitive environment without intruding in the community, but I'm working on the periphery to ensure the effective patents are minimal. For the dealing with the past and the present, what we do is essentially acquire patents and license them on a royalty-free, fully paid-up basis into the community. To any and all companies that agree not to sue Linux, to utilize their other patents to sue Linux with, and to provide a grant back into the community that makes it a richer pool of intellectual property that people can share in for protection purposes and defensive purposes. That's for the past and the present. For the future, I would posit the view that if we think about defensive publications, which are really nothing more than codifying our inventions in a very streamlined way so that others can't invent those ideas to utilize them for potentially negative purposes. And so if we can engage the creative energy and the inventiveness of the open source community, of the Linux community, and provide defensive publications as a vehicle for that engagement and that inventiveness, we will then limit the number of patents that get granted in the future, and we'll raise the bar considerably for those that do get granted. I'll talk more about that later today in a breakout session. Essentially what OIN is defined as is a collaborative enterprise that enables innovation in open source and an increasingly vibrant ecosystem around Linux by acquiring and licensing patents, influencing behaviors and policy in the policy community, whether it be in Washington or elsewhere, so that there's strong receptivity and support for open source and for Linux. And we're also involved in defending the integrity of the ecosystem. We've amassed a very significant portfolio and continue to acquire patents that will allow for the community to continue to move forward in an unabated way, so that we can, situations like SCO we almost needed for people to understand that there will be patent issues that are raised. The key is how we address those issues and how we neutralize the threats that they potentially represent. So really what we're looking to do is to enable, influence, and defend, but for the sole and exclusive purpose of enabling the community to grow and for patents to have a de minimis effect. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges that many companies face that have been involved in the former paradigm of how we invented, how we participated in growing businesses, and particularly in computing, IT, and telecommunications. We have monopolies, duopolies, oligopolies, We've had companies that have utilized their intellectual property portfolios in ways that have been, if we think about it in terms of the benefits that the users actually, that we as users and that super users at banks and at insurance companies, at transportation companies, and travel companies, all these companies that rely on information technology to be able to enable work in a more efficient way. We've been deprived because of this siloed development process of utilizing capital and essentially multiple entities inventing competitively and then saying that my pile is bigger than yours and that's why my product's going to be in the market, or charging you a tax for actually having your product in the market because of intellectual property rights. Intellectual property is not a dirty word, and I think we need to get the point across that intellectual property, there are ways to be able to codify intellectual property inventions so that there are broader benefits for the entire community, and defensive publications is one such way. We don't only need to think about patenting as intellectual property, because that's not the case. We started out in a situation where in the late 90s, many companies viewed what Linus had done and open source as an anomaly. Something that, this is maybe fine for a couple of application areas. Maybe it's not radically different from what we were already doing if we're a company that's in a monopoly position or duopoly and is selling products in the market. But then I think quickly, because of the growth of Linux and the fact that so much proselytization had been done to prepare the way, it's almost as if from the early 80s, the work that had been done in preparing the way for open source needed one rallying point, one vehicle, and Linux became that vehicle. And in its slipstream, the relative success or failure of the 300 other programs that are out there and those that will follow depend in large measure on the success of Linux. And I think that's why we're focused on Linux, because it is the seminal program within open source and a program around which many other open source programs rely, or upon which many other open source programs rely. And as we go from this anomaly phase to then early stage denial, many companies that are in these positions are not able to sense make, they're not able to understand what's happening, that this is an incredible phase shift. Where I started this discussion, this is the most powerful transformational invention and innovation modality that we've ever seen. And we need to kind of pinch ourselves periodically and recognize what we're involved in, because it truly is incredibly important. But we also have to be somewhat empathetic, although not highly tolerant if the behaviors become negative toward Linux or open source, from companies that are going through this transformation, this, as Thomas Kuhn's wrote in the Structure of Scientific Revolutions, this paradigm shifts. They're incredibly difficult for entrenched monopolies and duopolies to actually navigate through. And then as handsets, 60% of handsets actually shift to Linux in the next 3 years, there'll be late stage denial, and then ultimately we'll be moving through to awareness, recognition, and a new paradigm. And all of you are making that shift happen. And I'm proud to be part of this, because as the final image shows, it's important for us to be able to understand whether it's a duck or a rabbit. And there's a way of seeing, or Weltanschauung, that Kierkegaard and others talked about, that we really are in this process of seeing something anew. And because of the thought contagion that exists in the collective intelligence in this environment, it's incredibly exciting to be part of it and to be helping in the process. So thank you very much.